We are Borg. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. You will adapt to service us.
Erase all irrelevant data.
I'm pretty sure that part was never part of it. Erase all
No, but
data.
Seven of Nine says that a lot in this. She talks a lot about irrelevant data.
That's right. So this is
I think they should have incorporated that in the Borg monologue. It should have been like, resistance is futile. Your data will be erased. All your files.
All of your memory, right? So yeah, welcome to Clever Orbits. This is Lewis, that's Richard, and we're talking about Survival Instinct, which is an episode of the 6th season of Star Trek Voyager. It was a good, entertaining, fun, interesting, I think well-written, better written, honestly, than a lot of Discovery episode.
Yeah, I had that thought quite a bit. It was quite refreshing.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this episode. I felt like it was relaxed in a way that Discovery wasn't. I felt like Discovery was always frantically trying to make some kind of point, and I didn't actually know what point it was, but I knew that it was heavy-handed, and it was kind of stressful to watch, but this is relaxing. It's this character study. It's about life and death. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree with the relaxing part. And at the same time, it accomplishes a lot of subtlety, which was really satisfying. To start off, it adds some stuff to the Borg. So at the very beginning, when I'm watching the Borg on the planet, I'm thinking, oh, so that's basically what the Borg are: blinkies and mechanical sounds. Because it's a ubiquitous aspect to what they are. It's not the whole of them, but I was just like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The Borg costumes were a bit silly. Like in that scene where they're standing around the campfire and their memories are coming out, the guy's having this emotional moment, and he's wearing this just completely ridiculous costume with blinking lights. It was a bit much.
It was, in a word, incongruous.
I liked it.
Yeah, I like the exploration of individuality versus collective here, and it with all that we've talked about, and with all that we've seen in Next Gen and then Voyager, there was never this precise kind of exploration. So where what Seven does while she's kind of an individual, like when she's been released from the collective, to the same extent that the other people around her have, while they're on that planet, is it's natural and normal. Like, she's recovering from being only a Borg and like never having experienced real fear of death. And it has this impact that she's then got to take responsibility for later on once she's an individual again. Like, that's really what happens in this episode. She sees, oh, because I created this new collective by assimilating them, I did something over and above what they would have had to suffer from as Borg, and now I have to deal with it and manage it. And then also, her fear of, she had several fears in play, I think, not just death. She was afraid of being alone. She was afraid of dealing with and handling the chaos of the world. Yep. And she was afraid of making something of her own identity. Like, if she doesn't have the Borg to tell her what to do with her life, it becomes, honestly, more of a struggle, more chaos, more difficult, more of a challenge. And
a lot more responsibility.
Yeah. And so that confrontation between her and those emotions or existential situations caused her to, she was so afraid of those. And I think her fear of the situation was the strongest emotion in play among that whole group. Like, you have the other people who are kind of they're curious and then they're frustrated and whatnot. But her fear was so strong that it drove her to take away their burgeoning individuality and to relinquish her own again.
Yep.
So
it's a pretty powerful and pretty dark story. It also provides a really cool psychological perspective on the Borg. The Borg are like what you turn into when you're afraid of death and afraid of being alone and afraid of taking on the responsibility of becoming an individual and establishing yourself. The Borg are like this, hell you get sucked into when you're afraid of those responsibilities, and in this case, you can get sucked in so far that you pull in other people with you.
Yeah, it's almost like in the work of Heidegger, das Man, the they, the idle chatter of the they, like we relinquish our freedom to choose and to be responsible. Well, the responsibility bit is more the later the later Sartre, after he had encountered Marx more deeply. But it's where you choose to relinquish or abdicate your sovereign responsibility for the meanings you're creating in your life and dealing with it. And so that this is kind of a confrontation with those larger existential forces that we don't ever see with the Borg, really.
No.
Or that often in Star Trek in general. I mean, it happens sometimes, but not always. So.
Well, I think it's interesting to compare with Unity, the other Voyager episode about sort of people that sort of half Borg state. I also think it's cool that Voyager depicts this universe where there's not only the Borg, but there are these sort of pseudo-Borg around. It's like there's this Borg ecosystem that's infecting the Delta Quadrant. But anyway, in Unity, people were in this half Borg state, and they were connected to other people, and they loved it, and they derived a lot of meaning. And they're interesting to wonder what the difference is there. I know there's some technical difference, like in one case it's 709's nanotransmitters, and the other one it's who knows what other thing. But what's more interesting is the philosophical difference. And it shows that there's both a good side and a dark side to this kind of connection that the Borg embody.
Well, it's also really, I think, strongly made as a really clear point that it's a measure of the quantity of people that you're connected to. Like, if you're only connected to 3 people, you're stuck hearing each individual's thoughts, and, like, it's really vivid.
In Unity, it was like 10 people. I mean, it's hard to imagine that 3 people is hell and 10 people is great. I could buy it if 3 people is hell and 1 billion people is great.
Well, there's got to be some point when, that blending into white noise that gets mentioned actually happens. There's got to be some point at which that occurs. Yeah. And so whenever that critical threshold is passed, that's when it becomes a more comfortable experience and less like being a schizophrenic. Because that's kind of what they experience.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, there's sort of 2 ways you could go with the Borg. And I feel like the writers have sort of gone back and forth on these. There's one where it's like you are individuals and you're plugged into this machine that tells you what to do, and you hear other individuals' voices. And then the other view is that you're actually a hive mind. You actually don't have any individuality. You literally don't have your own voice. There's just one voice, which is the voice of the collective. I feel like the writers haven't really figured out which one they're going for. They're both pretty interesting, though.
Yeah, there are moments when in the inter-Borg communications, it seems like they're being given directives by the collective.
Yeah.
That's
like Borg 2. There's like Borg 1, which is the hive mind, and Borg 2, which is just like top-down control through cybernetics or something. This is definitely a Borg 2 episode.
Maybe it's a variant function. Like maybe it's not either one. I mean, it's clearly not either one all the time because we've seen both. And so maybe just like we decided that the Borg Queen kind of gets taken off the shelf as needed.
Well, in this episode, once they crash on the planet, 709 says they're starting the, quote, secondary protocol. And that's when she starts giving orders, and then they say, we agree. So I think the secondary protocol is like when the actual group coordination breaks down, then they have to go to this top-down control structure. But they still talk about being in the collective and hearing other voices, which indicates that there are still, in some sense, individuals in the collective.
Interesting.
I mean, I think about it the cells in your body. Those are kind of like the drones in the Borg. It's hard to imagine that. I mean, it's not the case that there's like one cell in your body that bosses around the other cells. Any individual cell has no idea what's going on in the whole body. The whole aggregate of them thinks as an aggregate, and it's completely incomprehensible at the level of the individual cell. I think like the coolest version of the Borg is the same way. The drones don't hear other voices. They don't even know what they're doing. They're just like, as far as their consciousness is concerned, they're living in some kind of weird dream world, and their bodies are acting out the directives of the collective.
So what we'll actually see later on with Unicomplex 0, those episodes, is that there is some extent to which the Borg consciousness does experience a distinction between like consciousness as a Borg and then consciousness of, well, those who have the mutation. Because in those episodes, well, I don't want to spoil those episodes. We'll get to them, but there will be more that touches on this. The judgment that too little collective is a bad thing, apparently, was something that showed up for me. Like on another level than just the experience of how many voices. Like, if you're facing a huge group of people that are all aligned, purposive, intentional, organized, coherent, like that's a thing to be reckoned with. You look at a big army or something and you think, wow, look at that. Whereas if it's just kind of a bunch of like confused individuals, then you're like, I'm stuck with these people. They have no idea what they're doing either.
So maybe the issue isn't that there are too few people in their little mini collective. It's rather that their mini collective didn't have purpose. Yeah.
Well, they did eventually. It was just a very unique kind of purpose.
Their purpose in the end was to get out of the collective.
Yeah. Which is kind of boring compared to the pursuit of perfection.
Yeah, but I mean, it's part of this whole idea that there's not just the Borg in the Delta Quadrant. There's this whole universe of sort of Borg offshoots that are sort of these pseudo-Borg things, which I think is pretty cool. And it's pretty realistic. If you imagine this is a real ecosystem, you don't just have a species. You have a species and it interacts with other species, and other species will pick up its behavior, and, they'll rely on its behavior for their little ecological niche.
Yeah, there's a lot of impact that their culture and that their being and their technology has on everybody around them.
Yes.
This really makes the Delta Quadrant unique and interesting. The way that Seven responded to the situation of being cast into individuality, it struck me as possibly part of the motivation emotionally for the formation of the Borg. Like there's this medical upgrade that we all get when we're in a collective state, as they mentioned in Unity, like the collective energy of it all will start to heal you or whatever. And then, looking at the fear of death and the fear of being alone will connect in this semi-permanent way, and then eventually it became permanent, and then the strength of the collective grew, and the individuals and their experience of participating individually dwindled, and then, we could come up with a whole narrative about how it works.
It's empathy as a way to find purpose and meaning and connection in the face of death. And in some cases that can go pathological, which is what the Borg are. But the initial thing that draws you into them is a possibly noble draw.
So there's a lot of other cool stuff about this episode.
It was really good.
I really loved the look of Voyager, honestly. The CGI was well done. It's a really pretty ship, and especially later on in the show, it just looks good. And then, so this episode was pretty well paced with some solid dramatic tension, and as you pointed out, like it delves into the characters. It's not really trying too hard. It's kind of subtle.
It doesn't. I feel like Discovery was really trying, and I wasn't sure what it was trying to do, but I knew it was trying. And this was a lot more. I feel like this was a lot more itself, if that makes sense to say about it.
Yeah.
It was a lot more comfortable in its own skin.
Yeah, I wrote in bold, that this is so freaking well written. I mean, it's a mature, intelligent expression of this show. I mean, the highest form of the story, you don't have to negotiate very much to get there. It's just what's on the screen. It's well acted. It's simply written. It's got decent music. Some of the music was really good. No need for heavy effects, and an ethical quandary consequent to depthful, well-articulated characters. Like that scene with the Doctor and Seven near the end, where he's trying to kind of make sure that her motivations are founded in solid reasoning on the basis of, not just her conception of herself or her own desires.
That was a scene that showed real psychological insight on the part of the writers, I think. That was cool.
Yeah, and the Doctor, too. I was impressed with the Doctor as well.
Especially for a hologram. He just like figured out what was up with 7 of 9 immediately.
Yeah, they have kind of a close bond. There was an episode we skipped called Someone to Watch Over Me where the Doctor kind of teaches 7 of 9 romance, but I didn't feel it was as much about the Borg as about 7 not knowing how to do dating. And I really loved it.
What did he teach her?
What's that?
What exactly did he teach her? Did he teach her how the evening ends?
Basically, the ways of like relating in fairly diplomatically adept communications with people. Like, I'm not going to just casually insult you or tell you that I'm superior to you because I used to be Borg. Stuff like that. How to dance.
I don't know. Some guys might find that hot.
Probably. I know one or two actually who like being insulted by attractive women who reject them. Actually, I only know one who's got that specifically. Anyway, I like by this point. I mean, 7's been on the ship for several years. She's grown into having a family. I like the whole interaction between her and Naomi Wildman, the little girl. And let's see. There's some interesting questions here, like what block has been effaced from the individual Borg drones such that they have memories rushing back from their previous lives? And how is an individual drone constituted, both in terms of programming and in terms of hardware, such that this is something that can happen? And what went haywire such that this did happen? That's my curiosity.
How was drone formed?
That was what?
How was drone formed?
Yes, exactly.
I don't know, but it seemed like psychologically it was a really well acted scene around the campfire where it really seemed like some horrible force or a force that they thought was horrible was coming out of their unconsciousness, and they were like discovering these things about themselves that they were afraid to discover, and they were just completely disturbed by it. It was really good. I'd imagine that's what it's like when I don't know if you're like remembering something that I don't know. There's a lot of debate about whether repressed memories are real. There's a lot of times they're not. But I'd imagine if you do have a repressed memory and remembering it, it would be a lot like that.
Yeah, it was plenty visceral, plenty disturbing, plenty interesting.
It was like you could tell that there was a top-level part of them that was programmed to fight these instincts that were coming out, but the instincts were coming out. And there was also a part of them that liked that. And it was just really cool.
Yeah, I did like what you mentioned earlier, the mention of the secondary protocol. I like that the Borg have an eventuality program like that. Like, here's how we're going to deal with this when this happens.
Yep. Let's see. I'm looking at what I wrote down here. I wrote down 7 of 9 has a hole in her mind. I've seen this plot line somewhere before.
Yeah, actually, wait. I don't think they took it from Babylon 5, but I see the connection.
No, it's a very effective plot, and it worked here, and it worked in Babylon 5 too.
It would probably work.
I didn't quite get why her memory ended up getting erased, though. I think I missed that.
Of the events in question?
Yeah.
I think it was classic psychological repression. I think she was just so disturbed by death and then the chaos of having to be kind of violent to these burgeoning individuals, and then the whole thing. She felt guilt. And that's a very real. So in real cases of PTSD, the thing that does it to people is when it's like some naive person goes into a war and then finds himself just killing people. And understanding that you are a monster in that moment, it just totally destroys you. That's where PTSD comes from in many cases. And so that was a really interesting.
That was sort of exactly what was happening to her. She was discovering what a monster she can be, and she just could not integrate that into her self-image.
Yeah, exactly.
I get that psychologically. I feel surprised that the Borg don't have a way to deal with that kind of thing, though. I feel like their whole system has to be pretty much an expert at psychological manipulation, right?
Well, they did. They did. When she got reintegrated into the collective, for all we know, she knew nothing of that, and she didn't have to deal with it until later on when she was an individual, when she had been unassimilated, when her personality had a certain measure of free play again. So, like, within the context of being Borg, as a drone, she probably just, like, there are well-worn neural grooves around those memories such that she never had to encounter them or engage with them again. And, in fact, one of my mentors, Kevin Trudeau, talks about how to be successful, you can still have skeletons in your closet. You only just have to have a level of performance that meets with the challenges that you deal with daily. And so, like, for her, probably it's a more efficient use of metabolic and other resources to not wipe out every memory of past experiences or personality when people are turned into a drone, but rather to reorganize the expression of the resources that constitute their brains and their bodies in such a way that those memories just don't get activated, they don't get dredged to the surface, they aren't a problem because they're never, something that's present. They're just kind of dormant and latent inside the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It just seems like when they're accessing her memories, it seems like they're accessing, like, files. And it's hard to imagine that kind of mechanism would affect memories that are listed in, like, a folder in a computer. But I don't know. The Borg are complicated.
Well, that's actually a really interesting and subtle point. I'm sure that the information that gets incorporated into their personality after they become a Borg drone and how they relate to everything that they are learning gets organized in a systematized way in the brain. I'm sure that it must be more like a filing system, more like a database, and less like actual memories at that point.
And it's interesting that a lot of the scenes on the planet 7 and 9 keeps talking about how they need to stop accessing irrelevant data, right? That's exactly what she ended up doing. She made that memory irrelevant data.
I think that basically supports what I've been contending, like that they have possession of data and information and experiences that they just don't make use of, which I mean, we are here to add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own, right? There's some measure of that the Borg want. The Borg want those, they want the raw physical power and force of individual bipeds. They want, like, the unique qualities and experiences. I mean, okay, maybe this is an issue. Maybe this is a question. How much of what an individual is relevant to perfection on the one hand and also daily operations as a drone on the other?
I don't know. It could be that they use that data for the collective without exposing it to the individual drone because they knew it would cause damage to the individual drone.
Yeah, it would reactivate their memories and their personality and have them confused.
Like the 7 and 9's traumatic memories or whatever, they went to some central processor which, like, examined them and figured out how to better deal with this kind of situation in the future and developed some new protocols or something. And then said, okay, we're not going to show this particular drone this data again because we'll lose our drone there.
That tracks. That's reasonable.
Let's see.
The last 2 points that I've got on this, and this may end up being our shortest podcast, interestingly. I mean, I guess there's not much to, like, contend against.
Yeah, no, it's a very good episode, and I feel like it was very deep. It is kind of interesting that there's not a lot to talk about. Maybe it's because it's not very controversial.
Yeah, I think that might have been what they were going for with Discovery now in retrospect. Because
controversy?
There's a lot to talk about and a lot to make sense of and to try to, like, have an opinion about. Like, if they spark controversy, that'll get the show ultimately more attention.
It's true.
And it's just being good.
I think with modern shows, they not only write the show, they also sort of write the social media reaction that they want to happen.
That's cool and interesting. Makes me really curious.
I find it. It's all just leading to a world where Mark Zuckerberg controls all of our experiences, right?
Maybe he is. Maybe the origin of the Borg is simply Facebook.
Maybe when you get hooked into the Borg Collective, the first thing you have to do is sign up for your Facebook account.
You put your profile picture up. Can you imagine Borg drones having profile pictures?
Well, they wouldn't need it. Everyone's profile is going to look the same.
Universal domination. Go ahead.
Yeah, they say that's why Facebook beat MySpace, because on Facebook every profile looked the same, and on MySpace you could add backgrounds and music and animations and junk, and it made it just a mess. But Facebook, everything looked the same, and people liked that.
The individual versus collective, right there in our social media profile pages.
People want to be part of collectives. People say they want freedom and individuality, but I don't see much evidence that that's true. I think people mostly want to be in collectives.
Yeah, I released a post last week where I talked about how, like, if you are concerned about creating relationships and you're feeling insecure or whatever, that really what you should be focused on is loving yourself, like finding that satisfaction that you think you need out there in yourself. And then this guy came back and responded. He was like, well, you really are underplaying the extent to which we need and want community. Like, it's like a thing that's not just going to go away because you tell people to love themselves more.
I think on a psychological level, meaning sort of has to come from without to some extent. It's very, very difficult, maybe impossible, to really, truly create meaning entirely on your own. It's a community thing.
Interesting. That is interesting. Huh.
And in fact, maybe that's what meaning is, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, well, not necessarily a whole nother conversation. I mean, because if the Borg want perfection, let's say perfection is some kind of meaning-making process, a sense-making process, then there needs to be a collective engaged in it.
Yep. I mean, when people feel a sense of meaningfulness, it's usually when they're part of a group of people that are tightly coordinated around a goal, an ambitious goal, and a goal that they find noble, right? The Borg are this.
Yeah, I think, well, the issue with that is it implies a little too much individual expression of personality, and desire and satisfaction for each drone. Like, I mean, it must have been there present in the beginning, that kind of aspiration for those first kind of half individual, half drone people, I guess. But later on, what we see with just drones that people assimilated and used, they don't have the space for the expression of individual aspiration towards nobility. I mean, 7 of 9, there's still some, there's still some hint of aspiration to that in the Omega Directive, and the fact that it got expressed for her after she was no longer a drone implies that, it does actually play some part in the makeup of drones, even after they're mostly no longer autonomous. But the question becomes how do you instill nobility into something or someone about something when they don't have really conscious experience in the same way anymore? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's tricky. So 709 shows genuine enthusiasm for the Borg project and Omega Directive, and it's part of what makes that episode cool. And I know it could be that that's just sort of the residue. After you get unhooked, that's what happens to be left. That might not be what motivates you when you're actually still hooked up. But, I guess another way to think about it is it's like, so people get a sense of meaningfulness from participating in groups that are pursuing goals, but that these groups can become pathological and they can start to attract people who really are desperate and don't love themselves and feel like they have nothing inside and just want to suck all the meaning out of the group. And you can get things turning into cults, basically, which are exploiting people and leading them down a very dark path based on their initially agreeable motivations. And so the Borg are kind of a cult. You can imagine that they've drawn people in with this sense of meaning and higher purpose and stuff, and then it's gone in a very bad direction because something was pathological about their goals. I mean, you can see groups of people as sort of like symbionts or like viruses. In a symbiotic case, being a member of the group enhances each individual because it gives them purpose. And in the virus case, being a member of the group sucks the energy out of the individuals. And tricky because a group that is good at one time can turn bad. I don't think a bad one can turn good. I don't know if that's happened, but good ones can definitely turn bad. And the Borg are like this huge example of one of the failure modes of group coordination.
What happens when people get the benefits from being in a group and then it turns bad?
Yeah, it's hard to say exactly what happened. It would be cool to know the history.
It'd be cool, I think, to write the history.
Yes.
Yeah. So the last thing that I have on this episode that I was thinking was really cool was this whole notion of survival is insufficient and how those characters like related to their lives after regaining their individuality, or which is more important, right? Being able to have freedom as an individual or live a long life. And which I guess the individual would have to choose that value for themselves, which they do, basically. So.
Yeah, it was, I found it to be like a moderately interesting ethical decision at the end about whether to let people live their short, meaningful lives or send them to, basically live a long time, but on the equivalent of a mental ventilator. I knew which way the decision was going to go, so that's why I say it's an ethical decision of moderate difficulty. Like once Chakotay's in there, he's going to talk the person out of what they're thinking, right? And it's going to be because of his deep spiritual knowledge or whatever, right? So it was satisfying to watch.
When you say the ethical quandary was at a moderate level of difficulty, this makes me think of like a video game.
Well, this is like the trolley problem where it's just like one person and a million people.
God, never mentioned the trolley problem. Even luckily,
trolley problems are like the normal form for ethical difficulty. Anyway, let me see what else I wrote down here. If the Federation encountered another group with the Federation philosophy, wouldn't they be obligated to merge with it if they're really in keeping with their philosophy? I don't know why I wrote that down for this episode, but it came into my mind and I wrote it down.
Yeah, I would like to propose that question actually has the least possible content relating to this episode of any question that you've ever had.
Well, I guess I thought of it because they're at this space station and they're talking about how great it is to encounter another culturally open people. And then Tuvok comes out and he's like talking about all this horrible crime they're committing. They're like doing all kinds of property damage and stealing stuff. And
that thing.
And Chakotay's like, well, isn't it good to be around people that are open-minded? Like, I know why they're open-minded. It's because they can steal people's stuff. Voyager's just getting fleeced here. And they let on these people whose goal is to, like, basically kill one of their crew members? I don't know. Seems like an argument against cultural openness.
I'm pretty sure that I stand with Tuvok. I stand with standing Tuvok, who says, actually, I liked his response in those scenes, too. He was just kind of, you could tell he was slightly annoyed and disconcerted and like, what kind of ship am I on? Like, like these people, they just don't understand. There's a second page. There's a third page. Yeah. We should stop this now. Like, why are we doing this? This is dumb. And then Janeway's just like, yeah, no, this is fine. We'll just fix the stuff they break or whatever. That's, I don't know. Like, she's a very different captain. Like, I think it stands out pretty clearly in this episode compared to Lorca, compared to Picard. Picard would have hated something like that.
Yeah. He would have hid in his office.
Or not allowed it on his ship. I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's.
Yeah, he would have said this is a serious professional military. It's not military. Scientific vessel. Frivolous activity.
I won't have children running around my bridge.
Exactly. It's for the children.
Yeah,
I'm a role model.
I saw some interesting stuff in the past month about both Patrick Stewart and William Shatner really wanting to work with Quentin Tarantino.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I want to see the Quentin. I mean, we already saw, like, you know, ninja stars going through people's temples and people blowing up on Discovery, so I don't know if Tarantino really has a lot to add. But we already saw some people getting wrecked.
Yeah, Tilly got stoned, basically. I mean, yeah, I think it would just be cool, I think, to see Picard and Kirk on screen together again. And I think it would
and
be
very old.
Yeah. Well, they've talked about, like, having Picard and Kirk, or at least Kirk, because Kirk is so much more old and has aged so much less well than Patrick Stewart, play a CGI version of himself. Like,
yeah, that's getting into our VR future there. I don't know about that.
Well, it would be interesting. It would be interesting to have an actor play themselves. Like instead of in Rogue One, we had whoever else it was playing Princess Leia or playing Carrie Fisher. Like, yeah, I think that would be cool to have him play himself. And then also to have the entire Kelvin timeline cast, which would be weird and interesting. Have Kirk meet Kirk. I guess that would be cool.
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so final thoughts on this. I give it a 9 out of 10. I think it was a great episode. It was fun. It was well written, all that we've mentioned already. And it's
9 out of 10.
Yeah, it's just pretty clear. Pretty clear. And then, well, the next that we're going after is we've got our special guest star, the lawman, Jonathan Futrell.
Oh,
and
when's that? Next week?
That is the 26th. Yeah, and then we're gonna watch the episode that we missed. We missed a couple from Next Gen. We'll go back to it near the end of our Borg adventure. But the episode Family, where Picard deals with the consequences of having been assimilated and having been freed, and also there's some family drama, and possibly the best scene of Patrick Stewart on film as Captain Picard.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You mean when he's fighting in the mud with his brother?
Yeah. And then he kind of breaks down. Yeah. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. This has been fun. I find that when you're on, Richard, when it's just you and me, things tend to get a lot more focused and philosophical and less critical and less oriented towards controversy, maybe. But then that's also, we're often dealing with, when it's just you and I, we're often dealing with the older stuff.
Confounded.
Yeah, so.
When you and me, it's usually Borg, and it's usually the three of us for Discovery.
Yeah, now that Discovery's over for a year.
Now we're going to get the real data.
Now we're going to get the real stuff, yeah. All right, well, thank you all for joining us, and have a happily assimilated night.